First story. I took the job at the McDonald's on Highway 34 because I had no other choice. I was buried in student loans, and no one else was hiring for night shifts. I was desperate, and the pay was decent enough to cover some of my bills. Besides, how hard could it be to work in a place that barely had any customers after midnight? The restaurant itself is isolated, sitting right off the highway, with nothing but miles of empty roads stretching out in both directions. During the day, it's just your typical fast food joint, busy with travelers and truckers. But once the sun sets, the place feels different. It's heavier, if that makes sense. The silence is unnerving, broken only by the occasional hum of the kitchen appliances or the distant roar of a passing truck. Sometimes hours would pass without a single car pulling into the drive-thru. At first, it was easy to ignore the strange vibes. I'd bring my laptop, try to get some studying done during the slower hours. But after a few weeks, things started to happen. Things I can't explain. Started small. Doors swinging open on their own. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe some faulty hinges. But the doors would open when there was no breeze, no air conditioning running, nothing. Then there were the sounds. Faint whispers like someone muttering just out of earshot. I checked the dining area, the kitchen, but of course no one was ever there. I figured I was just sleep deprived. I mean, who wouldn't be? I was balancing classes, homework, and now this midnight job. My mind had to be playing tricks on me. Then I saw the shadow. I was in the back, taking inventory, when I glanced up at the security monitor. There, in the corner of the screen, was a figure. It was just a glimpse. A dark shape, barely visible, standing near the soda machines. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the front, expecting to find some prankster messing around, but the lobby was empty. I checked the cameras again, nothing. Just the usual empty restaurant. I convinced myself it was a glitch in the system. Maybe the cameras were old, maybe the lighting was off. But then it happened again, and again. Each time, the shadow appeared a little clearer, a little closer. One night, the drive-thru buzzer went off at around 3 a.m. I hadn't seen a car pull up, but I figured I'd missed it while cleaning. When I looked at the screen, there it was, the figure. Standing at the drive-thru window, hood pulled low over its face. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. My first instinct was to call out, but something told me not to. Instead, I went to the window, heart pounding in my chest. But when I got there, no one was outside. The parking lot was completely empty, not a single car in sight. I'd love to say that was the worst of it, but things got stranger. I'd hear footsteps behind me when I knew I was alone. Sometimes, I'd feel a presence standing right behind me, so close that the hairs on my neck would stand up. But whenever I turned around, there was nothing. Then came the nights when I'd hear the walk-in freezer door slam shut, the metal handle rattling as if someone was trapped inside. I'd check, but the freezer would be empty except for that heavy, freezing air. That's when I started asking around. One of the day shift workers, an older guy named Tim, told me that other employees had quit after seeing similar things. He mentioned that some people believed the place was haunted, that something bad had happened years ago. But when I pressed him for details, he clammed up, wouldn't say anything else. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with that place. Then I found out about the disappearances. 3 employees had gone missing over the past few years, all during the night shift. No one had ever figured out what happened to them. They were just gone. No signs of struggle, no clues left behind. The police wrote it off as people skipping town, but now I wasn't so sure. On my last night, I decided to record everything. I figured if I could catch the figure on video, maybe I could prove I wasn't losing my mind. So, I set up my phone, propped it on a shelf facing the drive-thru, and waited. For hours, nothing happened. The quiet hum of the kitchen filled the space, and I started to think maybe it had all been in my head. Then, at 2:45 a.m., the drive-thru buzzer went off again. I looked at the camera feed, there it was, the hooded figure, standing just beyond the window. But this time it was different. It wasn't just standing there. It was staring, or at least I think it was. Even though its face was hidden, I could feel it watching me. I grabbed my phone, recording the whole time, and slowly approached the window. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the camera steady. As I got closer, I could see it. The figure wasn't standing still. It was moving, slowly edging closer to the glass. I wanted to run, but something kept me rooted to the spot, like I had to see what would happen. When I reached the window, I pointed my phone directly at it. And that's when I saw nothing. No one was there. But when I looked back at my phone, the figure was still on the screen. Closer now. Too close. I felt cold breath on the back of my neck. The last thing I remember is turning around. They found my phone the next morning, lying on the floor in the kitchen. The video was still there, but the final frames were strange. The hooded figure gets closer until it's practically filling the screen. And then, in the very last second, you can see me, standing in the background, frozen with the figure right behind me. I haven't been seen since. Second story, the forgotten customer. I've worked at McDonald's for over a decade, and you think you've seen it all by then. Drunks stumbling in after a long night, families with screaming kids, regulars who come in like clockwork for their coffee and egg McMuffin. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened at our small-town McDonald's in 2019. I'm Sarah, the manager at the only McDonald's in Hadley, a quiet little place in rural Oregon. Nothing much happens here, really. We get the same people day in and day out. The biggest excitement usually comes from teenagers hanging out in the parking lot or the occasional argument over a messed-up order. But then the complaints started. First, it was just one guy, Tom, one of our regulars. He came in almost every morning before work, always cheerful, always polite. But one day, he seemed off. His face was pale, and he didn't stay long. As he was leaving, he pulled me aside and asked, "Hey, Sarah, who's that guy who sits in the back all the time?" I frowned. "What guy?" "That man. He's always at the table in the corner, near the back exit. He just sits there. Never orders anything, never eats. Just watches." I had no idea what Tom was talking about. I was in that restaurant every day, and I'd never noticed anyone like that. I brushed it off as maybe a misunderstanding or someone just quietly keeping to themselves. But then, a few days later, another customer said something similar. They mentioned feeling uncomfortable because of a man sitting in the back, not eating, not speaking, just staring. The weird part? None of my staff had noticed anything. When I asked them about it, they all shook their heads. "No one like that ever comes in here," one of my shift leaders, Jenny, said with a shrug. "We'd remember if someone just sat there all day doing nothing." The complaints kept coming. Different customers, same description. A man in his 40s or 50s, always sitting at the same table in the back corner. Never eating, just observing. It was starting to freak me out, so I decided to keep an eye on that table myself. Days passed and nothing unusual happened. I began to think it was all just paranoia, maybe some kind of local prank or a rumor that got out of hand. But then, one evening after closing, I saw him. It was late, around 10 p.m., and we were getting ready to lock up. As I walked past the counter to double-check the doors, I glanced toward the back corner, and there he was, just sitting, staring out the window. I froze. I could feel a chill crawl up my spine. He didn't look like anyone I'd seen before. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something from the 90s, and he was completely still, like a statue. I tried to shake off the creeping dread that settled over me. I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or anything like that, so I decided to approach him, ask if he needed help or something. But the moment I took a step toward his table, the lights flickered. Just for a second, but when they came back, the man was gone. Vanished. The chair he had been sitting in was pushed in neatly, as if no one had been there at all. I couldn't stop thinking about him. The next day, I checked the security cameras. I went through hours of footage, scanning for that moment I'd seen him. But there was nothing. The back corner of the restaurant was empty the entire time. It didn't make sense. I knew what I had seen. Determined to figure out what was going on, I started digging through the restaurant's old records. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe some clue as to who this man was, why he kept showing up. That's when I came across something strange. Buried in an old box of files, I found an article clipped from the local newspaper, dated over 20 years ago. In 1997, there had been a fire at the McDonald's. Not a huge one, but bad enough that the building had to be closed for several months for repairs. The article mentioned that a man, Richard Mallory, had been a frequent customer. He had died in the fire. The details were vague, but apparently he had been trapped inside during the blaze. I felt my blood run cold. Could this be the man people were seeing? The man I had seen? Couldn't let it go. As the anniversary of the fire approached, I became obsessed. I had to know if the figure I saw was somehow connected to that man. On the night of the anniversary, I stayed late again. It was just me in the restaurant. Lights dimmed, the hum of the refrigerators the only sound. And then I saw him, at that same table, sitting just like before. This time I wasn't scared, I was determined. I walked toward him slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could feel the temperature drop. The air around him was freezing. When I was just a few feet away, he finally moved. He looked up at me, and I swear to God, his eyes were empty, dark, hollow pits where his eyes should have been. I tried to speak, to ask him who he was, but the words wouldn't come out. Before I could do anything, the entire restaurant plunged into darkness. The power went out, and I was engulfed in pitch black. I don't remember what happened next. When the morning staff arrived, they found me sitting in the back corner, staring blankly at the table. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The only thing I had done before I completely shut down was scrawl a number onto a napkin. Table 19. The same table where the man had always sat. It's been months now, and I still haven't recovered. I can't work. I can barely function. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, sitting there, waiting. They say I won't ever be the same again, that my mind has fractured. But I know the truth. He's still there, watching. And I think he's waiting for someone else to notice. If you ever stop by that McDonald's in Hadley and someone warns you about the man at table 19, take them seriously. Because once you see him, you might never be able to forget him. Third story, the delivery never made. I've been a rideshare driver in Los Angeles for a couple of years now, and while the job can get weird, I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. You hear strange stories from other drivers, people trying to pay with something other than money, passengers asking to be dropped off at abandoned lots, the usual. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night. I still can't fully wrap my head around it. It started like any other shift. It was a Thursday night, slow but steady. I had a couple of short rides, nothing out of the ordinary, and decided to take a break and grab some food. There's a McDonald's on the outskirts of town, not far from the highway, and I pulled into the drive-thru around 10 p.m. After placing my order, I moved up to the pickup window. That's when things got strange. I was scrolling through my phone, half paying attention, when I noticed a man standing next to my car. At first, I thought he was just another customer waiting for his food, but he wasn't in line. He was on foot, standing off to the side, looking nervous. He knocked on my window. It startled me. I don't usually expect anyone to approach the car like that, especially at night, but something about the way he looked made me roll down the window anyway. "Hey man," he said, his voice shaky, eyes darting around. I need a favor. Can you do something for me? It's for my wife. Now, I've dealt with sketchy situations before, but this didn't seem like that. He wasn't asking for money or trying to cause trouble. He just looked desperate. His clothes were a little old-fashioned, nothing crazy, but like something from a decade ago. And his hands, I noticed, were trembling. "I need you to take this to her," he said, holding out a small, crumpled paper bag. It looked old, worn at the edges, like it had been sitting around for a long time. "Please, it's important." I hesitated. "I don't know, man. What is this? Why can't you take it yourself?" He swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder like someone was watching him. "I can't. I just can't. I need your help." Maybe it was the look in his eyes, or maybe I was just feeling bad for the guy, but against my better judgment, I agreed. "All right," I said, taking the bag from him. "Where am I going?" He scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to me. I didn't recognize the street, but this is LA. The city's huge, and I've driven in stranger places. "Just make sure she gets it," he said, backing away slowly. "Please." Before I could ask any more questions, he disappeared into the night. I stared at the address, then at the bag sitting on the passenger seat. It felt light, almost empty, but I didn't want to open it. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. My food was ready, so I grabbed it, then drove toward the address he'd given me. It was out of the way, down a quiet residential street I hadn't been on before. The houses here were older, the kind you'd see in a neighborhood that hadn't changed much since the 80s. When I finally pulled up, the house looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the windows boarded up, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. There was no sign of anyone living there. I checked the napkin again, thinking maybe I had the wrong address, but it was clear as day. This was the place. I got out of the car, holding the bag, and approached the front door. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I knocked, but no one answered. The house seemed completely lifeless. Something told me to leave, to just put the bag down and get the hell out of there. But my curiosity got the better of me. I walked around the side of the house, peering through one of the broken windows. Inside, the furniture was covered in dust, untouched for years. I should have left right then, but instead, I knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. I didn't know what to do. The guy was so insistent that his wife needed this package, but there was no way anyone had lived in that house for years. Feeling uneasy, I headed back to the car and decided to return to the McDonald's to ask if anyone knew who he was. It wasn't far, and maybe someone there could give me some answers. But on the way back, things took a turn for the worse. About halfway there, my vision started to blur. Came out of nowhere. 1 second, everything was fine, and the next, I could barely see the road. My head felt heavy, and a sharp pain shot through my temples. I blinked, trying to clear my eyes, but the world around me seemed to twist and bend. I slowed down, thinking I could pull over, but before I could, I felt the car lurch. I heard the screech of tires, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the side of the road. The flashing red and blue lights of a police car filled my vision. My body ached all over, and the taste of blood lingered in my mouth. I had crashed. The car had veered off the road, slamming into a guardrail. I barely remember the paramedics pulling me from the wreckage, asking if I was okay, if I could hear them. My head was spinning, but I managed to nod. One of the officers opened the passenger door to check the inside. That's when he found the 2 paper bags sitting on the seat, the one from McDonald's and the crumpled, old bag the man had given me. The officer looked at me, confused. "You delivering food?" he asked. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. My mind was foggy, disoriented. I asked them about the address, about the man who had given me the bag. The paramedic who was treating me frowned. "Where exactly did you crash?" I described the location. One of the officers exchanged a glance with the other. "That's where it happened," he said quietly. 10 years ago, a guy named Marcus Reed crashed there. He was a McDonald's employee, driving home after his shift. He died on impact. The paramedic nodded. He was on his way to deliver food to his wife. Never made it. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to explain what had happened, the man, the bag, the address, but they just gave me a look, like I was still in shock, confused from the accident. I wanted to insist, to tell them about the man I'd seen, but my throat felt tight, and the words wouldn't come out. They took me to the hospital to be checked out, and I spent the rest of the night trying to make sense of it all. The man I'd spoken to, was he real? Was it possible that I had somehow encountered the ghost of Marcus Reed, trying to finish the delivery he never made? But the bag, the old crumpled paper bag, that was real. I know I didn't imagine that. And now, every time I drive past that stretch of road, I feel it, the weight of unfinished business, of a delivery never made. I've stopped taking night shifts since then. Some things are better left undelivered. Fourth story, the silent order. I started my new job at McDonald's thinking it would be just that. A simple job, a paycheck, nothing more. I'd recently moved to this small town in upstate New York, hoping for a fresh start. My first few days were uneventful, learning the ropes, getting used to the flow of the drive-thru. It was easy enough, and my coworkers were friendly, though they all seemed to treat the job like something you just got through. But one thing nobody warned me about was the night shift. On my third shift, they put me on the drive-thru alone. It was a Monday, and the restaurant was quiet, only a few cars rolling in every now and then. The headset's familiar crackle filled the silence as I waited for the next customer. When it came, the voice was low and distorted, barely audible through the static. "I'd like a large fries and a Coke." I frowned, adjusting the volume on my headset. "Sorry, could you repeat that?" The same low, garbled voice responded, almost mechanical, like it was being filtered through something. "Fries and a Coke." There was something wrong about it, but I shrugged it off. The system was old, and technical glitches weren't uncommon. I took the order, hit the button to bring up the drive-thru camera, and waited. No car. I checked again, peering out through the window, expecting to see brake lights in the lane, but it was empty. Puzzled, I asked through the intercom, "Could you pull up to the window, please?" No response, just static. The minutes passed, and nothing happened. Eventually, I cleared the order and told myself it was a glitch. Maybe the car had driven off, but I couldn't shake the unease that crept up my spine. The same thing happened 2 more times that night. A low, indistinct voice placing simple orders. No cars, no one ever pulling up to the window. By the end of the shift, I was spooked, but I kept it to myself. I didn't want to be the new girl freaking out over a bad speaker system. When I mentioned it to a coworker, Paul, the next day he laughed it off. "That's just the ghost car," he said, grinning. "The what?" Paul leaned against the counter, smirking. "You're not the first one to hear it. That drive-thru's been acting weird for years. Some people say it's haunted. Others say it's just the ancient tech screwing with us. Either way, don't sweat it," but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Especially because the voice, something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't just some faulty speaker. Like it was watching me. Things got worse on my next shift. Again, the voice came through, low and garbled. "Large fries, Coke," but this time there was something else. As I listened closer, I heard it mention something that made my blood run cold. "Large fries, Coke, Tina." I froze. I hadn't said my name over the speaker. My name tag wasn't visible from the drive-thru. There was no way they could have known. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe someone in the restaurant was messing with me. But when I asked around, everyone either laughed it off or looked at me like I was imagining things. That night, the voice came back, each time a little clearer, a little closer. "Fries, Coke, I see you, Tina." I ripped off the headset and left the booth, my heart hammering in my chest. When I returned, I tried to make light of it, told myself I was being paranoid. But the nagging fear wouldn't let go. Who or what was on the other end of that intercom? Desperate for answers, I started asking around more seriously. That's when I heard about the incident from a few years ago. A customer had gone missing while placing an order at this very drive-thru. Late one night, just like this, his car was found abandoned a few miles down the road, the engine still running. He'd vanished without a trace. People in town didn't like to talk about it. They said the case was never solved, and the family eventually moved away. It was just one of those mysteries that slipped into local legend, quietly ignored. But I couldn't ignore it. The voice kept coming. Every shift, the same distorted order, but now it was saying things that no one else could know. Things about my life, where I'd lived before, details about my childhood that I hadn't told anyone here. By the fourth night, I'd had enough. I wasn't going to be scared anymore. I was going to confront whatever was behind this. When the voice crackled through the intercom that night, I didn't wait for it to finish. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my resolve. "Stop playing games and come to the window." For a long moment, there was only silence. And then, so faint I almost didn't hear it, the voice responded. "Come see." I slammed the headset down and stormed outside, marching toward the empty drive-through lane. The cold night air hit me, and the parking lot was completely still. No car, no lights, nothing. But then I heard it, the low hum of an engine. Slowly, impossibly, a car appeared at the end of the lane, headlights flickering on as if they had just materialized from the darkness itself. It was an old sedan, black with no license plate. My heart pounded as it rolled forward, its engine making a soft, guttural noise. I backed up toward the building, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't see the driver's face through the tinted windows. I ran back inside, my pulse racing, and told my manager. But when he checked the cameras, there was nothing. The lane was empty, just like before. I didn't wait for the end of my shift. I clocked out early and drove home, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. The black sedan was there. It followed me through the quiet streets, never getting too close, but always keeping pace. My hands tightened on the wheel, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I pressed the gas pedal harder, desperate to lose it, but it kept up with me, the engine's hum filling the silence of the night. I don't remember how I lost control of the car. Maybe it was the slick road, or maybe it was the panic that clouded my mind. But before I knew it, my car was spinning, skidding off the road, and everything went black. When I woke up, there were flashing lights, paramedics, police, but the sedan was gone. I don't remember the impact, but they told me it was instant. I shouldn't have survived, they said, and yet here I am. But every day since, I've heard the same phrase, echoing in the back of my mind, no matter where I go. Order complete. It wasn't until weeks later that I learned no one had found any wreckage of the sedan. It had simply vanished just like it always had. The drive-through is still open, still serving customers, but I haven't gone back. I can't, because now, when I walk past quiet streets at night, I hear it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The low hum of an engine following just behind me. And I know it's only a matter of time before my order is finally delivered. Fifth story, the supernatural Happy Meal. I've worked at some strange places, but nothing compares to the McDonald's on the corner of Jefferson and Oakwood. It's just your average fast food joint, tucked into a quiet neighborhood. Or at least it was before the remodel. It all started after the renovations. The place was old, and corporate wanted to update the look. New floors, fresh paint, the usual. I'd been working there for about 6 months when construction began. Nothing out of the ordinary at first, just the usual noise of drills and hammers. But then, one morning, the construction crew found something buried beneath the floor. A small, leather-bound diary, old and fragile, like it had been there for centuries. No one thought much of it at the time. One of the workers handed it to our manager, Rick, and he just tossed it in his office like it was some forgotten piece of junk. We all kind of forgot about it after that. That's when the weird stuff started happening. First, it was small things. The Happy Meal toys began showing up in places they shouldn't be. On the counters, stacked neatly on tables after we'd closed for the night, even inside the play place. We thought it was just some prank by one of the night crew guys, but everyone swore they had nothing to do with it. Then it got worse. One night, I was working the closing shift with two other employees, Maria and Jake. It was around 11 p.m. The dining area was empty, and we were getting ready to lock up. Maria went to the walk-in freezer to grab some supplies, and not 2 minutes later, I heard her banging on the door, shouting. When I ran over, the door was locked. That's weird enough, those doors are designed not to lock from the inside. I had to use my manager's key to get it open, and when I finally did, Maria was shaking, her face pale. The door slammed shut by itself, she kept saying. There's no way that was an accident. We laughed it off at first, saying it was probably just the wind or some mechanical glitch. But after that, the freezer door started locking on its own more frequently, sometimes even when no one was near it. Then came the orders. First, it was little things. A burger would come out with pickles, even though the screen said no pickles. Or a milkshake would be made even though no one had ordered one. But then it got bizarre. Customers started receiving items that hadn't been on the menu in years. Things like the McPizza or the Arch Deluxe. Stuff no one had thought about in ages. One guy swore up and down he'd ordered a Big Mac but ended up with something called a McLobster roll, which, as far as I knew, had never been served in Texas. The worst part? We couldn't trace the orders. They didn't show up in the system. Rick, our manager, was losing it. He tried to keep everything under wraps, but it was getting harder to ignore. Employees were quitting, rumors were spreading, and customers were starting to notice the strange vibe. The toys, the freezer, the orders, it was like the whole place was coming alive, but not in any way that made sense. One night, after another round of unexplained orders and a freezer incident, Rick called me into his office. He looked tired, more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. On his desk was the old diary the construction crew had found. "I think this has something to do with it," he said, his voice low. "I've been reading it. There's something wrong with this place, Emily. I didn't understand at first. How could an old book have anything to do with what was happening?" But then Rick opened the diary, flipping through pages filled with strange symbols and rituals, all written in a language I didn't recognize. He showed me a section where it talked about this land, being used for rituals long before any buildings were ever put here. Blood sacrifices, summoning rituals, all kinds of creepy stuff. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. Rick was convinced that the diary was connected to everything happening at the McDonald's. The Happy Meal toys, the freezer doors, the weird orders, it all started after the diary was found. He figured if we got rid of it, everything would go back to normal. So that night, we made a plan. Rick decided to burn the diary. We drove to the back of the lot, behind the dumpsters, where no one could see us. He tossed the diary into a metal bin and lit it on fire. As it burned, the air around us felt different, heavier, almost electric, like something was watching us. The flames flickered unnaturally, turning from red to a sickly green before the diary crumbled into ash. We thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That night, after we locked up and went home, the McDonald's caught fire. I didn't hear about it until the next morning. Firefighters said it started somewhere in the kitchen, but no one could figure out what caused it. The building was gutted, completely destroyed. There was nothing left except for the charred remains of the play place and the blackened golden arches. The fire should have been the end of it, but even after the restaurant was gone, the strange occurrences didn't stop. A week after the fire, I was walking past the lot on my way home when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A small, plastic figure lying in the grass near the sidewalk. I bent down to pick it up. It was a Happy Meal toy, one of the ones we had before the fire. A tiny, grinning figure that looked far too innocent, considering everything that had happened. Since then, people in the neighborhood have been finding the toys, scattered in the park, on their porches, even left in their cars. No one knows where they're coming from, but we all have our theories. Some say the toys are being left by someone who survived the fire. Others say it's something far worse. As for me, I try not to think about it too much. But every time I see one of those toys, that creeping feeling comes back. Because whatever was released when we burned that diary, it's still out there. And I have a feeling it's not done yet.